Hello guys and gals, me Mutahar, and ladies and gentlemen, I'll be completely real with you. I did not ever expect to be making a video on this trash fire, but I'm sure a lot of you guys know about the dumpster fire that is High Guard. Now, I'll be real, I wasn't going to cover this, mostly because I'm not so much as a multiplayer gamer these days. Anytime I see multiplayer slop, live service shit thrown at me, I'm very apprehensive, even downloading it if it turns out to be free. But this is such a train wreck that it actually makes Concord look somewhat stable in comparison. Now, of course, ladies and gentlemen, obviously I wasn't going to make this video for no reason. There is a much deeper side to the story, but to understand, let's talk about the very beginning. So you probably remember the Game Awards. I made a video on it giving like my, what game do I expect to win? Obviously, we all watched the Game Awards. Congratulations, Expedition 33. But there was one reveal of the Game Awards towards the very end before we tied it off. Everyone kind of expected it to be like the biggest reveal because you're kind of ending off the world's biggest Game Awards show with that reveal. And it wasn't Elder Scrolls 6, no gameplay for that. It wasn't anything else that gamers were kind of going to bat an eye. But it actually turned out to be this game called High Guard. Now, I remember the time me, Maru, and Kyle were watching the Game Awards and we were just like, you know what, man? This looks like dog shit. It was just another live service game. I'm at a point where if you show me footage for a video game like this, I actually start doing double takes because I can't identify if I'm looking at like High Guard or if I'm looking at Overwatch 2 or if I'm looking at another hero shooter. It's just to a point where this entire thing has gotten so tiring. Again, I'm not going to make these videos just for like the viewership angle of it. Like I'm not going to do it just because it's like the hot trend. The reality of it is I had no care because hero shooters for me were effectively just a dead thing, right? Like I didn't care about this game. I didn't care about even Marvel Rivals. I didn't really care about, Overwatch 2. For me, this is a franchise. This is a type of gaming that I just cannot get into. But anyways, I decided because of this video, I'm going to download the game on PlayStation 5, by the way, because on PC, I can't really play this underneath Linux, I guess, because it has Secure Boot TPM2. I didn't even waste my time downloading it, okay? I'm not going to install anything that needs to be this invasive on my computer. Though I downloaded it on my PlayStation, I'll tell you right now, my worries were about as I expected. It was a boring, absolutely, I played one game, and that's pretty much all it came down to. It wasn't really particularly exciting. It was a game that, I feel like if you're in the hero shooter stuff, it's serviceable enough, right? Like, I'm not going to say it's a terrible game. Like, technically it starts up, you can get to the main menu, you can find a game, and the game is certainly a game. There's nothing technically wrong about it. It's just, personally, for me, incredibly fucking boring. Anyways, though, High Guard is so dead, ladies and gentlemen, that apparently if you go to their actual website at High Guard, so this is the actual developer, Wildlight GG, so it's great when it's like, here's our game, available free now. Let's go to the official site here real quick. Oh, and it's unavailable. So, when you see this, it's not a good sign. It never is a good sign. So immediately at this point, I'm like, hold on, let me check those Steam charts, I guess. Maybe I'll see if the game is somewhat active. Nope. There is, as of now, 915 players playing the game, right? It's long after work hours. People are able to get on and play some video games. This is a dead fucking game. If you go to the max for this, it started off around 100,000 players when it dropped. And it immediately went down to nothing. And you know what? I kind of expected this to happen, which is one of the reasons I wasn't going to make the video about it, because I knew when they announced this game at the Game Awards, there was literally no mention, no hum, no tweet, no gameplay video, no developer talking about it. It basically just went from mentioned at Game Awards to launched January 26th. And yeah, the launch was about as exciting as you can expect. Players played it for a few days, and they were like, yeah, this game sucks. You didn't really lose anything by playing the game. It's completely fucking free. It's just boring. When you release your game for free and people can't latch onto it, it's just probably not a great game. It's simple as that. So anyways, ladies and gentlemen, down the entire road over here with around a 98.5% player loss, meaning that there are actual NFTs, I shit you not, there are actual NFTs that have survived A loss smaller than Highguard. Not by much, mind you, but somehow they did. It's crazy to look at it that way. So yeah, anyways, it feels kind of bad because initially it felt like this indie company was just sort of like blown up by Jeff Keighley at the Game Awards. And they were kind of sabotaged that way, right? Because obviously when you're thrown into the Game Awards, and apparently it seemed like it was a free like showcase, like Jeff didn't even take money for that shit, apparently. And yeah, obviously the expectations were raised, the game wasn't that great, and yeah, it pretty much came out to it. Now, one of the reasons that I'm actually making this video now is that there's been some reports coming out that apparently Highguard was financed by a Chinese tech giant that some of you know as Tencent. Now, Tencent is effectively the Google of China. Like, they're one of the largest tech firms, not just in China, by the way, but internationally. They're huge. They have a lot of, they have a lot of fingers in every pie, and specifically when it comes to gaming, they've probably been behind some of the biggest indie games that you can imagine, right? Now, I think when you call yourself an indie company, it kind of means something, okay? Independent games are games made by basically just a handful of people, right? Not teams that are up in the hundreds, which apparently Wildlight, before they actually had such an intense amount of layoffs, literally 2 weeks after Highguard dropped, the game drops, it fails, and these guys don't have the money to keep going forward. So massive layoffs start. And apparently their company had like about 100 people working at it. And, comparing them to, like, companies like BioWare, which also had their own layoffs, we consider BioWare to be, like, AAA, but these guys to be indie, and they're kind of roughly at the same size. Now, of course, obviously, the actual source for this comes from a report by a publication known as GameFile, and they're the ones that said that Tencent was secretly financing this shooter, right? Even though the company Wildlight said that it was fully funded. Now, they don't share anything. Nobody has talked about this. But I wouldn't be surprised from seeing this game dropped and seeing it basically at the end of the Game Awards, which, if it was a paid-for ad spot, would be a pretty expensive ad spot. Now, I consider this to be pretty fucking deceptive, simply because this is not an indie company, ladies and gentlemen. This is actually a huge company, especially if they're backed by a company like Teamy, which for anybody that doesn't know, they've been behind so many of the multiplayer like shooters, things like Call of Duty Mobile, things like Delta Force, and apparently now they're financing the people that made Highguard, which basically, for anybody that doesn't know, is Concord 2.0. Now, the game, from my understanding, isn't exactly in a good situation, considering the fact that their website is getting taken down. The game basically has less than 1,000 players on Steam. Some people trying to find matches. It's been absolutely hilarious seeing them just sitting at a fucking login screen. And that's the thing about multiplayer stuff for me, right? Like, as somebody that's not even into multiplayer shit, the last multiplayer game that I played before Highguard, I'm not even joking, was Metal Gear Solid Delta's Fox Hunt mode. And I just played that because I'm a huge Metal Gear fan, but trying to find a match on it literally now, before I recorded like Highguard footage, you cannot find a match on that game anymore because a lot of these multiplayer games come out and they pretty much just die. Metal Gear is a very rare exception though, because Konami didn't put anything towards advertising that game. Like, unless you were following Metal Gear like the nut job that I am because I'm a fan of the franchise, you probably knew that mode existed. Some of you watching are probably like, wait, the Metal Gear Solid Delta has a multiplayer mode? Yeah, sometimes these things don't even get advertised. Companies just drop that shit in, expecting players to like harvest in basically a player base to grow, and then effectively money to be made through microtransactions. And that's sort of the thing, right? Like, a lot of these companies release these live service games, and these live service games don't really end up going anywhere because there's just no real hook to them anymore. Every single one of these games effectively plays the exact same. Back in the day when I used to really be in multiplayer stuff during my teenage years, early adult, I used to play games like obviously Call of Duty. You played your Counter-Strikes, you played Battlefield, you played Halo, you played Gears of War, and each of these 5 games were so dramatically different from one another, right? They had their own thing to provide. And now it feels like every game franchise is kind of like mixing in to like deliver a game to the Call of Duty player base. Especially, it's weird to me because that is a game that is so uninspired and dead to me. that I just don't understand why everybody's trying to chase the same dragon. And they basically create these live service, bare bones multiplayer releases at launch, of course, expecting players to come in by the millions and play the same few maps, the same few game modes, but purchase the $20 to $25 skin packs that these games effectively provide, some of the most egregious ones, of course, and think that it's all going to be fine and dandy. Honestly, the last live service shooter that I played so religiously was like Rainbow Six Siege, and even that for me is kind of dead. The only saving grace for it is like a repairing to the rank mode and maybe that new Metal Gear like season they have coming up. But other than that, like for me, most multiplayer stuff is effectively so dead that I'm not surprised that games like Highguard effectively get shot dead basically as soon as they come out. It's actually egregious, right? Some of these games usually survived for at least a year. But now it's to a point where these games don't even survive an entire month. Now, of course, compared to Concord, this is at least a free purchase that somebody could fuck around with, as opposed to Concord that was actually a paid-for release too. It's one of the reasons that games like Marathon for me, like, maybe I might end up getting it depending on how many of my friends end up getting it too, but it's also one of those games that I feel like I'm going to get into it for like maybe a few weeks, and then eventually I'm going to get bored of it like very quickly. You know, as a gamer these days, I think the best purchase that you can make is, and I know it's painful to say, the Steam Deck, or things like the AIM Thor, where you can at least like experience like a whole litany of older games. And this is the kind of stuff that I'm kind of into. Like, it's not that I'm so dead and out of gaming. I feel like if that ever comes, I'll just retire from the internet in general, because gaming is one of the things that keeps me here, keeps me excited, keeps me actually upgrading and purchasing, computer gear. If I ever fall out of gaming, it's pretty much done. But for me, like, most gaming is now done on the Steam Deck, where I just purchased like older games like Final Fantasy VIII. I installed like Morrowind the other night on my actual Steam Deck, and I'm just kind of playing that in bed for like an hour, here and there. And, thank God for suspending and resuming so I can just play a game, pause it, close the deck, toss it aside, and then come back to it later. I feel like that's where most of my gaming is sort of headed now, and just stuff like Highguard, I don't understand how games like this, I don't understand the money that companies are pouring into this and the expectations that they have. And there's a lot of people that sit there and say, but Muda, why are gamers so negative about anything that comes out? It's not gamers being negative. I'll be completely real with you. I hate the concept of like toxic positivity, where people feel like they just need to gas up every single thing out there. Highguard is not a bad game. It's just incredibly unremarkable, okay? It's like heating up a TV dinner. They're fine every once in a while, but this is by far one of the lowest quality TV dinners that you can find. It's basically serviceable enough for you to get your fucking nutrition out, or whatever they call nutrition, but after that, there's so many other options that are available, even freely, by the way. I think for me, games like Highguard and them being sort of snuck in and sort of like, what is the term for that? Where they have like the industry plant, where like an artist just gets sort of thrown into something. I feel like that's disgusting. This is not an indie game. I'll tell you something right now. There are actual indie games out there that I think deserve your attention. One of those indie games that I really like, and I've talked about before, are games like Shadows of Doubt. Now, this is not a perfect game, but the reason why I talk about it is because a small group of developers put together a video game that serves as a procedurally generated detective title that, I've put in around 40 plus hours into this, right? I feel like I've explored a fair bit of this game, and I still come back to it every so often. I feel like these are the games that should sort of be pushed if you're going to talk about indie games, because they're made by a very small group of people, and they're games that, relatively fly under the radar. Many people don't talk about them, and they sort of stay hidden. These games are infinitely, in my opinion, better than Highguard, if not just because they tried something genuinely different, as opposed to being another generic hero shooter. But even if you're not into something like this, there's still so many games that you can play that are far older, games that are just far better than the generic live service crap that Tencent or pretty much any company throws at you. Ladies and gentlemen, yeah, Highguard is a failure. It's a trash fire, but it's not surprising to me. People will sit there and be like, this is a surprise. Why do gamers hate this? It's not that gamers are hateful or gamers are being overly negative. The game that they were trying to release was just so fucking uninspired, okay? We've played games like Highguard for the last 10 to 15 years. We've seen it in some form of another, right? Gamers play video games, okay? There's games like Mugenics that are apparently really good. I haven't played it myself personally, but I've heard that people have jumped and, basically like clawed at it, no pun intended. And that's because those games probably have something worthwhile offering, as opposed to something like Highguard that sort of drops, expecting people to jump in and become the next big shooter streamed on Twitch. Surprise, surprise, the gamers don't latch onto it. They don't give a fuck about it. And they move on to something else. And the company that invested God knows how much money into this shit just has another dud. Live service stuff is so tiring these days. These games are like a dime a dozen. And I'm shocked to see every so often they keep releasing this shit, expecting it to be the next big 10 million played game, okay? I don't think another shooter will ever come out that'll be on par with the sort of cultural impact that something like Halo 3, for instance, had. So let's just chill back on this. Highguard is a failure, and very unsurprising failure. And now it turns out that the people that were financing this shit might have actually been one of the biggest companies out there. So an industry plant tried to get planted, failed to fucking sprout. That's pretty much the end of that, man. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, this is me, Mutahar. I'm gonna go back to playing some Final Fantasy VIII, man. Have a good time.